It probably goes without saying at this point that Commander has become the most popular format in Magic the Gathering. The result of this popularity, for better or for worse, is that more and more products are being released with a heavy focus on supporting the format, flooding it with cards designed to be played outside of the traditional 60-card style. This has caused the average power level of cards in your typical EDH deck to steadily increase, with new staples constantly entering the format and raising the bar on roles that have always needed to be filled. This steady increase has created an unusual phenomenon where one-for-one interaction, something that has always been commonplace in Magic as a whole, has slowly depreciated in value as threat density continues to grow and more cards demand answers in a typical 4-player game. While that's not to say that classic staples like Swords to Plowshare or Return to Nature are unusable, far from it, but it does mean that cards capable of providing reusable or repeatable forms of interaction are beginning to become more valuable. Today, we'll be looking at some of the best cards in the Commander format that can provide repeatable ways to interact with your opponent, and why those cards might be worth considering. Hang on just a second, guys, before we get into it. If you are interested in picking up any of the cards that you're going to see featured in today's video, you can now do so using my TCG Player affiliate link, which can be found in the description of all of my videos moving forward. By following the link in the description below, you'll be redirected to the TCG Player website, where you are free to purchase all of the cards that you were going to buy anyway, with no additional charge to you. But just by following my link, they'll know that I redirected a little bit of traffic to their website, which means I'll be making a commission off of every card that you buy. If you're looking for a way to financially support the channel, again, without spending any additional money, just remember to follow my TCG Player affiliate link in the description below, buy the cards you were going to buy anyways, and you'll be helping support me while getting to continue enjoying the hobbies that we all share together. Thank you all so much for your support, and with all that out of the way, let's get into the video. Alrighty, starting the list off with number 10, we have Oko, Thief of Crowns. For 1, a blue and a green, Oko is a planeswalker that enters with 4 loyalty. His +2 creates a food token, which can be sacrificed for 2 mana to gain 3 life, and his +1 targets any creature or artifact in play and turns it into a 3/3 elk creature with no abilities. Finally, his -5 exchanges control of any artifact or creature you control with any creature an opponent controls with power 3 or less. Widely considered the most powerful planeswalker in basically every 1v1 format, Oko has found himself on the ban lists for Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy, for being so abusively powerful that he warped just about every format he's ever been allowed to exist in. In Commander, he faces many of the same issues as other planeswalkers, being significantly less impactful where he has 2 additional opponents to manage at once. With that being said, Oko's ability to completely blank opposing creatures and artifacts is still incredibly powerful. 3/3 creatures are remarkably average in a format with double the normal starting life total, and cards like Beast Within and Generous Gift are format staples that still see play to this day for their incredible flexibility. While his status as a planeswalker obviously makes Oko quite vulnerable to removal through battle, he still brings one of the most unique forms of pseudo-removal in the game, essentially functioning like a Darksteel mutation or Song of the Dryads, but in such a way that the opponent has no chance of removing the effect without completely removing their neutered card from the field and then bringing it back. This often forces players to find a way to out their own commander if they want a way to regain access to their trademark abilities. While Oko can only elkify 1 card per turn cycle and is restricted to only hitting artifacts and creatures, the sheer power of this special form of interaction still earns him a spot on the list. Up next at number 9, we have Silverback Elder. For 2 and 3 green, you get a 5/7 Ape Shaman. Each time you cast a creature spell, you can choose one of 3 effects. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck and put a land from among them into play tapped, with the rest going to the bottom of your deck, or you can gain 4 life. Now, were you to read this card a decade ago, you probably wouldn't honestly believe just how much this guy does. Having not just 1, but 3 powerful effects to choose from, all for the mundane cost of casting a creature in a green deck, is honestly kind of nuts. While ramping and life gain are both great effects in their own right, obviously today we're here to talk about interaction. Silverback Elder carries the classic Disenchant Naturalize effect to destroy any artifact or enchantment, something we'd already seen on a ton of creatures before it, all of which have seen and many of which continue to see use in the Commander format. But Silverback takes the concept to a whole new level, turning any additional board presence you wish to present into even more removal. With powerful resource engines like Smothering Tithe and Rhystic Study being pillars of the format, having a creature that can answer multiple problem cards without breaking a sweat is pretty desirable. The fact that it comes on a 5-drop with 5/7 stats is honestly just a bonus. Silverback Elder is a must-have for any green-centric creature deck that can afford the triple green casting cost, being a flexible card that provides all sorts of benefits depending on what's needed in the moment. But the fact that you need to actually cast additional creatures, paltry as the cost may be, does keep him from holding a higher spot on the list. Next up at number 8, we have Avatar of Woe. For 6 and 2 black, we have a 6/5 avatar creature with Fear, but the cost to cast her is reduced by 6 as long as there are a total of 10 or more creature cards amongst all graveyards. You can also tap her to destroy a targeted creature, which cannot be regenerated. Avatar of Woe is a surprisingly old card, debuting in Prophecy all the way back in 2000. She's long been a Commander staple, but has become a bit overlooked in recent years due to the aforementioned flood of cards aimed specifically at supporting the format. Despite that, she still boasts a combination of effects that give her plenty of advantages over modern alternatives, the least of which being access to a wonderful cost reduction for easy-to-access conditions. Once you bring her out, she not only boasts combat evasion, but fittingly for a list like this, lets you target and destroy a creature each turn for no additional cost. What gives Avatar of Woe a leg up over other cards like Oko, in my opinion, is her ability to function as what I would refer to as a rattlesnake. You can leave her untapped as a form of deterrent, and make political deals to keep creatures from attacking you, while being able to drop her literal axe at a moment's notice. Her stats being a comfortable 6/5 also work in her favor, giving her the ability to function as both a reasonable blocker and attacker, while not having stats so titanic that she's likely to draw ire from lower life players. While many more modern decks prefer cards like Ravenous Chupacabra with abusable Enter the Field effects, Avatar of Woe can still hold her own amongst other removal options for her unique set of abilities that allow her to splash into a wide range of strategies. The number 7 spot belongs to Zak Primal Calamity. For 6, a red, green, and white, Zak is a 9/9 Elder Dinosaur with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. When Zak enters the battlefield, if it was cast, you can untap all of your lands, which can then be used to activate his 3 other abilities. For 2 and a red, you can deal 3 damage to target creature, 2 and a green lets you destroy an artifact or enchantment, and 2 and a white lets you gain 3 life. Zak has a bit of a reputation in Commander for being a bit pub stompy in the command zone. Naya colors contain plenty of ways to ramp into his steep casting cost, and once resolved, he has a habit of taking over the entire board state until removed. It's fairly uncommon for removal to be usable on the golden trio of creatures, artifacts, and enchantments, and even less common for that removal to be repeatable. While the red ability to hit a creature for 3 may sound a bit underwhelming, it's important to remember that since the effect can be repeated, even larger creatures are at risk if the Zak player passes with a bunch of open mana. Combining these effects with mana doublers can push them to pretty oppressive levels, making it difficult to keep any permanents around while Zak is present. The fact these effects come on a frightening 9/9 body with 3 meaningful combat-related keywords, and you wind up with an absolute raid boss of a creature. Zak is really only held back by his steep 9 mana casting cost, which, as mentioned, isn't unreasonable in his color scheme, but it does make him a bit clunky to use outside of the command zone. Especially since his untap effect only triggers when cast, making methods of cheating him into play, like See the Unwritten and Sylvalas Stampede, a little less ideal. Even still, the prospect of such a massive threat with the added benefit of reusable removal has made Zak a popular inclusion in many commander decks that can accommodate him. Up next at number 6 is Pyrohemia. For 2 and 2 red mana, Pyrohemia is an enchantment with 2 effects. For 1 red mana, you can deal 1 damage to each creature and each player, and at the beginning of each end step, if no creatures are in play, you must sacrifice Pyrohemia. On the surface, Pyrohemia looks like an excellent way to keep the board clear of small creatures, which is certainly helpful with many archetypes like Elf Ball and tokens, making a ton of 1/1 bodies. However, Pyrohemia got a big boost in popularity in 2017 with the introduction of the official dinosaur creature type, which brought with it a new keyword mechanic called Enrage. These abilities activated each and every time that the creature was dealt damage. Now, while only a handful of the enrage effects were particularly useful, in dedicated dinosaur strategies, overnight Pyrohemia went from a niche but useful tech card to one of the best cards in this particular deck, providing an easy way to abuse enrage effects to their fullest potential. While it's not a common include outside of decks looking to deal damage to all creatures for beneficial reasons, it certainly could be. Board wipes are extremely common in Commander, and in decks looking to run a smaller number of larger creatures, sweepers, or cards that deal a set amount of damage to all creatures, are a good way to keep the board from getting too cluttered without sacrificing the higher investment creatures that you casted yourself. Believe it or not, Pyrohemia is actually a color-shifted clone of another card called Pestilence, which came out first. But since dealing damage is generally more abusable in red, the original tends to see significantly less usage. Kicking off the top 5 is Goblin Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter costs 2 and a red for a 1/1 goblin creature. This creature doesn't untap during the untap step, but will trigger an untap each and every time a creature dies. By tapping it, you can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. It may seem unusual to have a creature that deals 1 damage to any target above a card that deals that amount to all creatures and players, but Sharpshooter is both more generically splashable and abusable. While its status as a creature leaves it more vulnerable to removal than an enchantment, it also brings with it a suite of benefits that Sharpshooter can take scary advantage of. On its own, Sharpshooter can of course shotgun down all 1 toughness creatures in play at a moment's notice, but if you want to really abuse it, you can combine it with the Death Touch keyword to turn it into a repeatable board wipe. Creatures with Death Touch will automatically destroy any creature they deal damage to, even if the damage dealt isn't enough to be lethal. While Death Touch may not be super helpful in more competitive environments, it can make combat much more frustrating in a casual setting. And since the keyword doesn't specify combat damage, the effect damage done by Sharpshooter still qualifies. Cards like Archetype of Finality, Basilisk Collar, and Gorgon's Head are easy ways to ensure Sharpshooter gains and keeps this keyword. Then, each time it deals damage to a creature, regardless of toughness, the creature dies. This of course untaps Sharpshooter, which can rinse and repeat until the only creatures left in play are your own. Sharpshooter is the kind of card that has a completely serviceable floor while having a ceiling that can keep the table on edge the longer it sticks around. Coming in at number 4 is Scavenging Ooze. For 1 and a green, Scavenging Ooze is a 2/2 ooze with a single effect. By paying a green mana, you can exile target card from any graveyard. If that card was a creature card, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and you gain a life. Sharing this spot is a card called Lion's Sash, a card with similar mana cost that drops the life gain for the benefit of gaining the counter as long as the exiled card was a permanent. Sash also brings the Reconfigure ability, which lets it function as an equip card that provides the equipped creature a buff equivalent to the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Graveyard-centric strategies are extremely popular in Commander, with a wide number of commonly seen commanders making appearances across many playgroups at all different competitive levels. As a result, a well-rounded deck should generally bring with it a method of graveyard interaction, with blanket effects like Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, and Grafdigger's Cage locking down graveyard access to the entire table. With that being said, should you bring these cards to the table and find that no one happens to be playing a graveyard strategy, these cards don't really do much of anything. While some forms of graveyard hate can slot into decks painlessly, with cards like Bojuka Bog and Scavenging Grounds functioning as mana sources even if the graveyard effects don't do much, Scavenging Ooze and Lion's Sash are unique in their status not only as a way to interact with the graveyard, but as potential threats at the same time. Whether players want to abuse their graveyards or not, it's only natural for those yards to start piling up as the game progresses. Ooze and Sash can take those piles of spent resources and turn them into muscle, quickly growing these initially innocuous creatures into sizable monsters in no time at all. While either card could feasibly take this spot on the list, I'm choosing to give it to Ooze simply because life gain in an extended game of Commander can often be extremely helpful, though being able to turn the power boost into a transferable buff shouldn't be underestimated either. Entering into the top 3, we have Dictate of Erebos. For 3 and 2 black mana, Dictate is an enchantment with flash and a static ability that makes it so anytime a creature you control dies, each opponent must also sacrifice a creature. Once again, Dictate has an older counterpart, this time being Grave Pact. Instead of having Flash, Grave Pact has a more restrictive but cheaper mana cost of 1 and 3 black. Dictate and Grave Pact are groan-inducing cards that are kill on sight for many players. These cards are most often found in Aristocrat strategies, which for those unfamiliar can be a little tricky to explain. Basically, Aristocrats is any strategy that centers on sacrificing your own creatures for beneficial effects, with the name being coined after the cards Cartel Aristocrat and Falconwreath Aristocrat. These are examples of one of the hallmarks of the strategy: free sacrifice outlets. The list of cards that benefit from being sacrificed is pretty extensive, but regardless of which you decide to go with, adding Dictate or Grave Pact into the mix turns these already powerful loops into functional board wipes. Aristocrat decks are famously difficult to interact with, since they can often respond to potential removal by sacking off the cards being targeted, and these instant speed responses make Dictate even more frustrating to deal with since the effect can be triggered on a whim. And since these decks want to benefit from sacrifices anyways, it becomes virtually impossible for opponents to maintain a more valuable board state. Since we once again have 2 cards vying for a spot, I decided to give Dictate the edge since, much like the other effects indicative of Aristocrats, it having Flash means you can bring it out at a moment's notice. Perhaps the most notorious user of these enchantments is Prosh, one of the oldest commanders in the format who not only dumps out a ton of disposable tokens on cast, but also functions as his own sacrifice outlet, letting him work as a one-sided board wipe. You know, when he isn't winning the game with food chain combos. The number 2 spot goes to Aura Shards. For 1, a green and a white, Aura Shards let you target and destroy an artifact or enchantment each and every time a creature enters the field. Now, when it comes to reusable and abusable interaction, it's pretty hard to top Aura Shards. As old as this card is, it still stands tall as one of the most powerful generic staples in the Commander format. Very few decks in Commander go very long without bringing creatures into play, and even fewer contain 0 artifacts or enchantments to target. At a base level, Aura Shards turns your standard plays into removal in a way similar to Silverback Elder, but with one important difference: you don't have to cast the creatures. Not only that, but since it doesn't clarify the creatures have to be non-tokens, massive token makers like Secure the Waste can set opposing board states back to the Stone Age. Blink strategies looking to abuse ETB effects can use Aura Shards to a degenerate level, basically doubling the value of their effects for no additional cost. The only real downside to Aura Shards is the need to target the cards you're removing rather than hitting the entire board a la effects like Bane of Progress. This means that in some corner cases, like clue tokens, the opponent can respond to the targeting by simply sacrificing the cards when needed. But let's face it, even in those cases, forcing the activation isn't a bad thing. If you're playing a green and white deck and have the capacity to include Aura Shards, you almost always should. The downsides are negligible and the upsides are exponential. In fact, I actually think Aura Shards is potentially even more generically useful than the number 1 spot on the list, but if you haven't guessed the number 1 spot yet, I don't think it'll be much of a surprise to you either. Finally, my choice for the best reusable removal in Commander goes to Hullbreaker Horror. For 5 and 2 blue, this sea monster comes as a 7/8 Kraken Horror with Flash and cannot be countered. Anytime you cast a spell, you can do one of the following: return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Once again, Hullbreaker Horror has a counterpart, which actually used to be a terrifying card in its own right, Tidespout Tyrant. But the sheer amount of power creep between these two cards is so stark that it really isn't a contest. Tidespout costs an additional mana to cast and has weaker stats, but instead brings the benefit of flying, a frankly laughable buff when considering the strength of its other effect, which trades the ability to target spells for the ability to target lands. While one of the more recent cards to release on this list, Hullbreaker is a contender for one of the most notorious cards in the entire Commander format, turning every card with Flash into a functional counterspell and every other spell into removal. With such a wide net of targets, the fact that Hullbreaker triggers with the cast of any and every spell makes him easily one of the most oppressive boss monsters the game has ever seen. Being uncounterable means you really can't stop him from entering, and having a functional counter magic effect that doesn't actually counter means that if you plan ahead, he's virtually invincible, even against effects which themselves can't be countered. Oh yeah, and he also happens to be a facilitator for infinite combos. Since he isn't restricted to only targeting opposing permanents, playing a pair of mana-positive artifacts is an easy way to generate infinite mana, which can then branch into an infinite sea of abusable loops. While able to serve as a win condition all on his own, the fact that he functions as recurring removal with one of the easiest conditions to meet, it's pretty hard to debate that Hullbreaker Horror is hands down the most powerful form of reusable interaction in the whole Commander format. Whether you're looking for a combo outlet in competitive, or a terrifying boss monster in casual, this card will have your back and make sure that no permanents are safe unless he finally manages to get dealt with. And that's going to do it for today's top 10. Reusable interaction is quickly becoming vitally important as more and more powerful cards enter into the Commander format. Plenty of awesome cards could have made today's list, and it was honestly pretty hard to narrow it down to only 10, so be sure to leave your favorite in the comments below. As a reminder, if you're interested in picking up any of the cards in today's video, you can do so through my affiliate link in the video description. If you enjoyed today's video, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next upload. With that, I'm an avid herpetologist. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.